that of Ms. Hermans at the stage. Others may still join us, Chair. So I will keep you posted if I receive apologies during the course of the morning.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I see there's a hand. Honorable Moatsi and Honorable Malimecha.
If I have to start,
Thank you very much, Acting.
Okay. Honorable Moatsi.
Okay, thank you very much, Acting Chair, Honorable Mbuyani. I move for adoption.
It appears Ms. Moatsi has moved for adoption of the agenda, Chair.
Oh, okay. Any seconder, Mr. Honorable Malimech?
Thank you, Acting Chair. I stand to second Mrs. Mbuyane. Thank you. Mrs. Moatsi.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Our agenda is duly adopted. We will get a briefing now from the ITAC on its strategic and annual performance plan 2023 and 2024 financial year. Secretariat, let's check who's there from the department to introduce the entity.
Chairperson Ms. Nikki Kruger will do the introductions on behalf of the DTIC. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Over to you, Ms. Kruger, for the introduction, and also you take on the presentation. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Honourable Chairs and members. Chair, I'm Nikki Kruger, the Chief Director for Trade Negotiations at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And the colleagues that will be joining from the International Trade Administration Commission is the Chief Commissioner, Mr. Aibonga Kawe, and he will be also doing the presentation. And then Ms. Nkuna, that's the Chief Financial Officer, and Mr. Semela, that's the General Manager. So, Chair, with that, I'll hand over then to the Chief Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Chief Commissioner Ayabonga Kawe, for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Acting Chair, and to the honourable members, a good morning to you all. I'm going to just try and briefly share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So really today what we want to speak to is our annual performance plan for 2023-24 and how that speaks to our strategic plan for this a 5-year period, but more importantly also how that aligns to the broader strategic impetus of the DTIC group, and we'll say a bit more about that in the coming few slides. So with that being said, we're going to maybe take a look also briefly at the key strategic objectives and performance areas, how it is that we are organized, and how our annual performance plan is really, I guess, distinguished by two features. The one is, measures and targeted measures of performance that consider the efficiency with which we undertake our work. And the second part, of course, are these indicators that complement the pursuit of industrialization and growth, the promotion of transformation, and the building of a capable state. We'll say a bit more also about our resource envelope towards the end of the presentation. But just briefly before we start, I think it might be helpful for honorable members for us to briefly reflect on the domestic, global, and of course geopolitical environment we find ourselves in. And it's quite clear that the global and domestic economic environment within which we operate and wherein we execute our mandate continues really to be characterized by uncertainty and turbulence. At a global level, we can see that geopolitical tensions, price pressures in critical product markets, and high interest rates continue to reinforce what we're observing as really subdued firm level and consumer sentiment. Here at home, we can also see that economic growth remains particularly constrained, which affects consumption and the investment decisions of firms and households. But we're also confronted by this issue of load shedding, which is introducing, I guess, persistent energy insecurity, which is further complicating the industrial environment and, of course, also at a household level, the economic choices that are made there. We do expect, though, that South Africa and the firms within our customs union, under pressure as they are, will continue to approach the International Trade Administration Commission for the trade measures we administer. And such support, in our view, must be complemented by other measures. And these measures must be the measures that address the competitiveness of some of these firms, must enable these firms to access critical export markets in order to generate foreign exchange. But also, the instruments that we have alone, if we only view them in isolated terms, will be blunt and not a long-term solution without significant commitments at a firm level to industrial upgrading. And in our view, this really necessitates policy interventions and measures that can complement trade policy by addressing some of the domestic challenges we face. I've mentioned the load shedding issue, but there are many other issues in our network industries, and also, I guess, the rise we're seeing in intermediate input costs in steel, in aluminium, in glass, in gas. And many of these challenges, of course, have an implication on many of the performance measures at a firm level, but also, as I said, the environment within which households make some of their own economic choices as well. So in that environment, a big part of our work really, I guess, flows from, the policy frame that is captured in the National Development Plan and many other successive policy measures in line with that, which include, of course, the Industrial Policy Action Plan, the Medium-Term Strategic Framework, and more recently, the Trade Policy for Industrial Development and Employment Growth, and the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. And really, all of these frameworks are quite consistent in their call and assertion that our approach to trade policy must be one that is developmental. It must be one that looks to ensure that trade policy continues to contribute to structural change in the South African economy, and structural transformation in particular of many of the primary and secondary sectors that approach us in the work that we do. And of course, in this approach, the Commission itself really takes on a developmental approach to tariff setting in relation to agricultural and industrial goods. And we take this on a case-by-case basis, informed by the balance of evidence that we see. And in some cases, of course, this gives rise to increases in tariffs, and in some cases, it gives rise to reductions in tariffs. There are also rebates on tariffs in some instances, and in others, we also undertake our work in a manner that tries to mitigate the serious harm visited on many of our industries as a result of unfair trade that gives rise to injurious imports that are either dumped or come in as a deluge of imports that have implications for the ability of our firms to be able to produce, to invest, to create jobs, but more importantly, to lay the basis for rising and growing in competitiveness of their processes in relation to their counterparts elsewhere. So a big part of how we do this work really is on three fronts. The first relates, as I said, to these instruments that we administer, informed, of course, by our primary legislation and the associated regulations, but also informed, of course, in some instances, by multilateral agreements such as those in the World Trade Organization. We also, of course, do a considerable amount of work alongside our colleagues at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition in relation to technical inputs, monitoring of trade flows, and of course, continuing trade-related support to the sector strategies as captured in many of the master plans that we have, and also technical inputs into trade negotiations at multiple levels, and even any bilateral discussions and dialogue with different blocks and trading regions of the world. Now, for all of this to happen, we do need an organizational machinery that is able to be efficient, that is able to be effective, and that is able to really modernize the way in which it works in order to be able to achieve all of these very ambitious objectives that we have. And we'll say a bit more about to what degree that resourcing must continue to allow us to continue to do this work. So just briefly, how are we organized? And I'm just going to maybe shine a spotlight on the core of the work that we do. I do have two of my colleagues on the line who operate largely on the corporate services side of things. So, certainly many of the questions that we might have, they will be able to field as well. But in relation to how the core of the work we do is organized, we have three divisions in the organization. A division looking at tariff amendments, a division looking at trade remedies, and by trade remedies, that includes anti-dumping duties, countervailing measures, and safeguards. And then we also have an import and export control unit that looks into the issue and administration of import and export permits, but also undertakes enforcement in line with the role envisaged for the Commission, alongside, of course, our other counterparts in law enforcement and even at the receiver of revenue, with regard to the enforcement, at our ports and any other relevant places of some of our import and export control-related measures. And as you will see, of course, in the tariff investigation, there is a product and a sectoral division between the two segments, and similarly so in relation to Trade Remedies 1 and Trade Remedies 2. So coming now to our annual performance plan. Well, in many ways, I think for 2023-24, our plan reflects our continuing work to try and really align our activities with other entities in the DTIC group around a common purpose, which is around supporting industrialization, driving transformation, and building a capable state. Many of the honorable members would know, certainly from prior presentations, that since the beginning of the sixth administration, all of the entities have tried in a way to really bat on the same wicket so that we're able to better understand the collective impact achieved by all of the different institutions that are engaged in administrative and policy work that, seen as a whole, constitutes our industrial and trade policy. And so in a sense, for us, it's about how and to what degree we contribute to these bigger macro meta objectives, supporting 1 million jobs, mobilizing 200 billion in investment, ensuring 700 billion in manufacturing exports, and helping the creation of Black industrialists and also advances in production. And so we'll say a bit more, as you'll see in the next few slides, about to what degree, with the tools we have at our disposal and the independent obligations that we have to discharge, to what degree are we contributing to all of these bigger macro objectives that we have. So maybe just before we get to that, it might be helpful for us to start off. As I said, there are two segments to it. There's on the one hand, efficiency measures, and then on the other, of course, some of the measures that contribute to transformation, that contribute to industrialization, and of course, to the building of a better and a capable state. But let's maybe start just with the key efficiency measures. You will see across the core areas of work I outlined earlier, that here are some of the indicators that we have, which from the 2021-22 financial year, we've started to target, actually from the 2020-21 financial year, which is about making sure that our decisions and our preliminary and final determinations are able to be arrived at within a particular time frame following the initiation of some of these investigations. And you'll see in relation to tariffs that it's not only about the investigation, but also about some of the other instruments that we administer in line with the Automotive Production Development Program, the APDP2, and you'll see there the verifications, the product rebate certificates, the eligibility certificates as well. And we are setting some firm targets there on how quickly it is on receipt of an application we can then issue many of these certificates. Because as you would imagine, honorable members, a lot of operational and firm level decisions are based on to what degree some of these firms in their own, cost-benefit analysis can be able to access all of the incentives associated with the APDP in order for them to make investment, production, and even in many instances in the automotive sector, export decisions as well. Similarly, in the trade remedies, we have similar efficiency measures there. And the only real distinction as it relates to import and export control relates, of course, to the quanta of the permits issued and, of course, the volume of scheduled and unscheduled inspections in relation to enforcement that are undertaken. And you'll see here in this table that we draw some comparison between actual baseline performance in 2021-22 and, of course, some of the targets that we have in place Many of these targets flow from our strategic plan, our 5-year strategic plan. But more importantly, really, is to continuously say that we have seen across the last few financial years following the COVID-19 pandemic, some variance in relation to what degree we've been able to undershoot and overshoot some of those targets. And I think the same would apply if one considers what happens in trade remedies, because as many colleagues would know, in trade remedies, there are significant and very hard timelines associated with some of these investigations. And once, of course, determinations are made on our end, those are then subsequently handed over to the relevant policymakers. And certainly, as you will see there, we continue to have very hard and fast targets to try and improve how it is that we undertake these investigations, and similarly for the issue of permits and some of our enforcement work as well. Now, let me come to what I guess we might call output and outcome-focused indicators. I think the criticism has certainly been from yourselves, honorable members, and even the policymaker, that in the past, many of our indicators have certainly focused at an activity level. They focused on the nuts and bolts of the activities without any real correlation to the bigger outcomes that we want at a time when the country is confronted by very difficult challenges. And so what we've done in this instance is to really try and streamline how it is we develop these indicators, how we sharpen our focus in targeting these across these 3 areas, as I said, around driving industrialization and growth, promoting transformation, and strengthening and building a capable state. And so what you'll see here in this table and in the annual performance plan that's been shared is that we've really tried to take a look at how our tools and instruments, right through from the reciprocal commitments and tariff amendments to our industrial rebates, right through, of course, to even some of our work we are undertaking in relation to the APDP and some of the relevant master plans, is to link some of those, in the case of rebates, for instance, to the level of manufactured exports that we want to target, because we are interested in ensuring that the composition of our export basket continues to have much more value-added goods in line with our focus on structural change, which is really trying to shift, I guess, the composition of our exports towards higher value added goods in the global matrix of production. Now, increasingly also, what we want to do is to start, and you'll see in the next slide, to start to gather significant intelligence and insight on the demographic composition of who is accessing our support measures. So you'll see here, it's important for us to link this to investment, to jobs, to output, to manufactured exports, to target certain districts from a geospatial perspective in relation to understanding where is our work felt, where is the impact to be found. And you'll see in that column here on outputs that a lot of these outputs you will also would have seen in the annual performance plan of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition as well. So that we're able to start to measure and track this and tell one compelling story on the back of this. And when I say compelling, it doesn't mean it's a good story. In some instances, it might even be a story that says we probably need to sharpen our pencils and do a bit better. And then in relation, of course, to the issue of transformation, it's not really just about saying, to what degree is our procurement spend really targeting designated groups? That's one part of it, indeed. But a very important part of it is to say, to what degree do our measures target, firms of a certain size? And we're interested in SMEs. To what degree do our measures reach in the non-metro areas? Because we know we have a challenge of the concentration of industrial production in many of the metro areas. It's a big part of our history and present. But also, in line with, I guess, the 2021 policy, to what degree do we, if we accept that trade policy reform has winners and losers, to what degree do we mitigate that, the adjustment costs associated with the displacement of production and displacement of investment and jobs? And what we are working on at the moment, certainly not only for this financial year, we do envisage that it might take some time, is to develop what we're calling an import sensitivity index. Now, this index is really trying to say which are the sectors that are subjected to significant import competition that has the risk of displacing investment, displacing jobs, and displacing production. And how do we then, based on the picture that emerges from that index, develop what is called a trade adjustment assistance program, which is certainly undertaken in many countries, including the United States, which is really about saying, can you create a package of measures that are able to assist workers and firms to adjust to a new market environment that would arise from any trade reform? Now, that trade reform is not just, increasing liberalization associated with the WTO, but increasingly in the immediate, the implications for production of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, for example. And so also what we also want to look at is, where does our work touch on labor-intensive sectors? So we know which sectors have, higher labor to capital ratios. We know which sectors have significant, for every R1 in investment, significant employment elasticity or employment multipliers. And so, for us, it's to say, we're doing all of this work, we're getting all of these applications. Can we organize it in such a way that we're able to better understand to what degree it's moving the dial on some of the things that we're working on? Let me then come to the issues around building a capable state, because a lot of what we want there will require that we really sharpen how it is that we work. And one of the areas is to also take stock of what we've done. So a big part of what the Act requires us is to undertake not just the monitoring of trade flows, but to undertake assessments and evaluations of what impact have our measures had? What impact has the commitment by firms to reciprocal commitments, or the commitment by firms to adjustment plans in the instance of safeguards? To what degree are we able to better understand what subsequently arises from that? The other, of course, is related to a resourcing issue. We do have in our annual performance plan a commitment to start to work on investigating the viability and sustainability of levying prescribed fees. The Act allows us to do so in Section 24B. And we're looking to say, to what degree can we be able to diversify where it is that our income in the organization comes from? And we'll say a bit more about that in the next slide. And also, of course, support to master plans. And as I said earlier, better understanding of the demographic, spatial, and even firm size dynamics of who benefits from our support. And then also, of course, what we're calling high impact measures to try and reduce red tape in relation to the work that we do, and to better tell the story of who is impacted by the work that we do, and how it is that that particularly unfolds. So let me just briefly come to the resourcing. I think many of the honorable members would be familiar. The bulk of our resources, as you'll see there, comes from transfers received within the macro-fiscal framework. Some of it, to some degree, comes from interest and other income. We've seen with the high interest rate environment that has certainly had some benefit in relation to what we've been able to get on that interest and other income measure there on positive cash balances. And then, of course, on the expenditure side, bulk of our spending really is on the compensation of employees. We're a specialized organization, very human capital intensive. And really the idea is to continue to attract the best talent and skill, and make ITAC a place of choice to work for many of the professionals who are interested in the microeconomic work that we do. And then, of course, goods and services expenditure there, some of it to some degree aligned to our annual procurement plans as well. So I think really the if I can just go back to this slide, really the story is about to what degree we can diversify and build resilience in our income side of that income statement. To any macro fiscal shocks that might arise, that might mean that transfers that we receive come through a bit lower, which of course will have a bearing and an implication on how it is that we do the work we do and the quality of the work that we do. And so that's why a big part of that, investigation of prescribed fees becomes quite urgent and important for us. Maybe then just the last one, just to give honorable members a sense of who is working at ITAC. We've got about 131 funded positions, which does include some contract positions associated, as you'll see there, in import and export control, with some of the measures including the price preference point system and some of the new regulations on the export of scrap and copper. And as of the end of the last financial year, our staff complement with those 131 funded positions was 99. We had quite a considerable number of vacancies. And if one looks at the breakdown from a demographic perspective, the majority of people who work are women in the organization at around 62%. And then, of course, just over a third being males. And in the senior management team, it seems that picture is slightly inverted, with just over half being men and just less than half being women. And then from a racial perspective, just shy of 90% being African people, 4% those who are white, and then, of course, 3% colored and 4% Indian. So, Honorable Chair, we'll pause here for now. And thank you once again for the opportunity, and we look forward to some of the discussion that will now follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Director Ayabong Wakawe, for the presentation. I don't know, in terms of the agenda, we are now zooming direct to clarity-seeking questions. If members need to input, question, or add anything in the presentation, now is the time to can do that. I'll see by the show of hands if anyone wants to talk to. Yeah.
We have Mr. Bergman, Chairperson. Mr. Bergman.
Yeah, I see Bergman.
Mr. Thring.
Thring.
Dr. Twane.
Thring, Dr. Twane.
Mr. Malamatia.
Mr. Malamatia.
Mr. Monakedi.
Mr. Monakedi.
Ms. Muatse.
Ms. Muatse. Are we covered?
Those are the hands for now, Chair.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Let's start, Honorable Bergman.
Chair, thank you very much. But just with regards to the international trade on the administration side, there was the announcement of the continuation on the ban of scrap metal. I just wanted to understand how that affects the RTAC in terms of, I mean, what did they base, what in their own investigation, what did they base that the continuation of the ban on, considering that the crime statistics don't seem to have supported that a ban on the scrap metal should have increased, or should have continued. For me, I see that this is actually bringing the exports down, or it's going to have an impact still on our exports. And I think that's problematic to us and to ITAC, no doubt. So what would they, what would we be able to advise the minister on this in terms of trying to use maybe technology in terms of supporting the cable theft, let's say, and using other advice from the scrap metal industry so that we can continue our exports and not target the exporting of trade metal, of scrap metal. Secondly, in terms of trade attaches in missions abroad, how are we networking? How is the RTAC networking with those trade attaches abroad? Are we using them? I don't see any targets that suggest that we engaging with them that could maybe boost some trade between certain countries. And then just with regards to two of the targets, there were targets where the permits issued, you got it as a figure. So where you've said that 16,000 permits will be issued, it's putting a noose around your neck. And I think it's to say that we have to issue 16,000 permits. What you should rather be looking at is the percentage of permits issued as opposed to the permits that are applied for. And I think what we would rather then want to see is how much of a percentage of the permits are being processed that are actually being submitted to the ITAC. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Tring.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my first question pertains to the anti-dumping restrictions or anti-dumping measures that that we look at, and the question there would be, what are the, if any, I suppose, just like with the chicken, the poultry imports that we had, there were complaints of, particularly from those in the poultry sector, of ITAC and Trade and Industry to institute measures to limit the anti-dumping practices. But besides the poultry industry, are there any other sectors where anti-dumping, or it has been found that there were countries that have been dumping their products in South Africa? And if so, what are those particular products? And what were the interventions that were used to mitigate that? Secondly, the target of raising some 200 billion rand in investment was one of the targets that was given in terms of some of the goals that ITAC actually has. How far have they come within the difficult global climate, financial climate? How far has ITAC actually come in realizing that those particular goals? And then with regards to your import and export controls, the import-export controls are there to enforce health, environment, security, safety, and technical standards that arise from our local laws as well as international agreements. So we've had some challenges and clearly, I think, some complaints where some of the products that are imported internationally do not meet up with our local domestic health laws, security, safety laws. And so could ITAC just speak to that, and how successful have they been in ensuring that our domestic laws are adhered to with regards to imports? And then finally, Chair, you would know that we, from the ACDP's side, continually speaks about the fact that we need to look at beneficiating our products, our raw materials. And so just in terms of policy position, does ITAC have a particular position with regards to beneficiation, particularly where we seek to create employment of some 1 million people in support of the economic measures that the country has? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Tring. Honorable Dr. Ntwana.
Good morning. My question, I've got two questions, and it's around the manufacturing base of our economy. Has declined over the past 29 years from like 20.5% in 94 to about 12.5% today. So mainly due to trade liberalization and cheap imports. So my question is, what role is the entity playing in reversing this? And then secondly, the clothing and textile sector, including the poultry sector, has experienced decline in the capacity due to cheap imports. It's probably linked to what Mr. Tring has also asked. So, but what measures has the entity employed to protect these sectors? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Malemaja.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me start by welcoming the presentation. Very straightforward and progressive for that particular matter. Simple and straightforward. However, Chairperson, one will be tempted to ask this question. What role is the entity playing in combating illicit trade? What is the success rate of entity in combating illicit trade? In the previous financial year, Chairperson, you will remember that. What is the value of the goods that have been seized by the department working with SARS? My last question, Chair, will be what outcome is realized from the entity's custom investigations, and what remedies are in place to correct any discrepancies or loopholes, Comrade? Thank you so much, Comrade.
Thank you very much, Honorable Malamecha. Honorable Monakadi.
Thank you very much, Comrade Chair. On slide 12, there is an indication that the entity, that is ITAC, will support 40% of master plans in which it will be monitoring trade flows. So my question is, in which specific master plans will this support be given? My second question is, has the department, obviously together with its entities, including ITAC, done an analysis and assessment of what the cost of trade protection is to the South African economy? In other words, what is the cost-benefit analysis in relation to industrializing our economy and in the process implementing import substitution? My last question, can ITAC provide detailed expenditure for 2023-24 financial year by economic classification, e.g. compensation for employees, goods and services, etc.? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manakedi. Honorable Mwatse.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. I've got only 3 questions. In slide 9, Chair, I hear the presenter talking about the tariffs increasing and decreasing, and then I will go straight to my question. What will be the basics for the entity determining a tariff increase or tariff decrease? I just want to know. And then my second question is, how is the entity dealing with the corruption when it comes to the approval of the import and export control permits? And then in addition to the targets that are aligned to ITAC's mandate, Chair, ITAC contributors to creating capable state industrialization and transforming through the joint KPIs. We want to know what is the required from the ITAC in terms of financial and human resources to achieve this joint KPIs, and also how do the joint KPIs impact financially and human resources? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mwatse. I see there's a hand now, Honorable Macpherson. Honorable Macpherson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Congratulations on your promotion. I want to chat about the work that ITAC does and doesn't do, because there can be no doubt that the excessive increases in tariffs are driving and fueling the cost of living in South Africa, particularly on core foodstuffs that ITAC has no hesitation to hike. But one of the questions that was asked was an important question. What is the cost benefit for the actions or inactions of ITAC? And I think that that's really important, because what ITAC essentially seeks to do is create an artificial economy for South African businesses at the expense of consumers. And that is just a fact. I mean, that's not even, arguable anymore. We've seen that in steel, we've seen that in poultry, for very, very little benefit of consumers or the economy. One just looks at Astral's picture that they painted in releasing their results, and their issue is not imports. Their issue is not alleged dumping. Their issue is the complete collapse of the state that has driven their business literally into the ground now. So how does ITAC view its role in the greater picture of the role of the state to create an enabling environment for cost competitive businesses to operate in this country? And does ITAC believe that their job is to support the state's industrialization plan, or is it to intervene where they believe that that dumping takes place? And if that is the case, then what does ITAC do about it? Is it reported to the WTO? Are disputes ever lodged with the WTO against countries for anti-dumping practices, or are they simply left? And then lastly, Chair, I would ask ITAC, what benefit does it believe specifically tariffs on steel and poultry have done for the country and for consumers, excluding the massive price hikes that people have had to bear? And do they think that that is justifiable? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Macpherson. Let me welcome also Honorable Msane. I see is part of us. I just wanted to pose some clarity as well here, because Honorable Macpherson has alluded to the issue of industrializing our economy. Require that we protect our infants industry, particularly those that are labor intensive. For an example, automotive, footwear, and beverages. So I just want to check with the entity in which sectors of the entity assessment determine require a tariff protection to enable the sector to maintain and create jobs. The other one will be on page 42 of the APP under the joint key performance indicators. ITAC reports a target of 50 new jobs will be created as a result of ITAC trade policies and instrument. I just want to know, how did ITAC arrive at this number, given the fact that the ITAC is not a direct creator of jobs? Thank you very much. Honorable Msane, are you here? Honorable Ntokozo, are you fine? Then we continue. Maybe we'll give back to the team, Ayabongwa, CEO, the DG, Nikki Kruger, because there are some questions that relate to the DTIC direct. You will advise us, Ayabongwa, in terms of the responses. Thank you very much. Back to you.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Acting Chair. And I will indicate which ones I think would probably be best suited for a response from the policymaking department. But I just wish to maybe start with your question, Honorable Mbuyane, there at the end. That 50 is missing a 0. It's a typo. And we did subsequently fix it in the revised one. So I think there's a version control issue. But maybe to answer your question, we don't create jobs, sure. But what we do use is our regulatory functions as per the directive issued on reciprocal commitments by the then EDD, which is to say, when there are tariff investigations, coming also to Honorable McPherson's point, is that, this is not an indiscriminate issue of a tariff. We also recognize that tariffs by their nature give rise to price-raising effects, which have an impact not just on end consumers, but also on downstream, industries for whom some of these products are intermediate inputs. So we certainly do understand that. And that's why in the reciprocal commitments, the areas we cover there are around employment. So we say, if you're going to get this kind of tariff relief, our understanding is that it should give you policy room by giving you much more favorable terms of access to the domestic market, so that you are able to invest in your own upgrading, so that tomorrow you will be in a much better competitive position to compete with domestic and global industry. And I think that's the idea. That's where the jobs come from. It's not because we do something, but we are saying that those are jobs that are arising from the work we do in reciprocal commitments, and similarly, of course, also in the other instruments that we administer. Let me maybe just work my way back and start with Honorable McPherson's point, because I do think that there is a debate at the moment in the society around whether or not, the tariff framework or the broader trade policy framework is contributing in a particular way to the cost of living crisis that we confront. Now, I would have a different view to the one that says we indiscriminately provide largesse without hesitation to domestic firms. On this reason, I think we've seen two things happening. The one is in relation to primary goods that are staple goods, in particular for poor households. There are two elements to it. The one is that you have seen, honorable members, that even in instances where the Commission itself has come on the back of the evidence to a recommendation that says, on this specific product, and I'll take poultry as an example, we feel quite strongly that this, position must be recommended to the minister, and the minister has arrived at a different conclusion, saying that actually the timing of this, if one considers food price inflation, one considers the, domestic and global balance of what's happening in the supply chains, probably not the best time to do it, even if there's a compelling case in line with the regulations and even with the, in the case of dumping, the anti-dumping agreement of the WTO. So I think there is that pragmatic sense in the application of policy to really recognize the impact that this might have on poor households. The second element to it, which I want to bring to the attention of honorable members, relates to the variable tariff setting regime in relation to maize, wheat, and sugar. So what we have there is a reference pricing system, which says the following, that in instances where we see very high global prices, there is a self-adjusting mechanism that brings the implied tariff, and by extension, the impact on prices, to zero. So if you go and check now at the moment for wheat and sugar in particular, the implied tariff is actually at zero because of where global prices, London number 5 sugar price, and the global, wheat futures prices are. And so that self-adjusting mechanism is aimed not just at, ensuring that poor households aren't adversely impacted by global prices of some of the staples that they have, but on the flip side, when prices are very low, it effectively provides a protective mechanism for domestic producers so that you don't have the displacement of jobs in horticultural elements of agriculture, which are some of the most labor intensive within agriculture. So we do have a mechanism in place. We do have these tools, but I think maybe sometimes, we don't do a good job in really speaking about how it is that these tools are administered. Honorable McPherson asked whether we are taking our matters to the WTO. I think I'm going to leave that to my colleagues at the DTIC, because as you would have seen in the slides, our task is to advise and provide technical advice to the DTIC. The DTIC, as the policymaking department, is the department engaged in multilateral and bilateral fora. There was another question. Of course, we do participate at that level. We are in continuous contact, for instance, with our team at the WTO, our team out in Geneva, on many issues. And even, I guess, are in constant contact with the AFCFTA Secretariat with regard to the evolution of our continental free trade area. So we are engaged in that kind of work. And we continue to try and capacitate ourselves to better be able to contribute to that kind of work. Let me come to Honorable Moatse's question around, what process do we follow to say this tariff must go up or not? I think there are a few considerations that flow into the assessment, and we'd be more than happy to share a much more detailed sense. But at a very high level, it's really about looking at the global trade environment. To what degree do we find that imports are displacing the ability of firms to invest, the ability of firms to actually use their installed capacity? We call on firms to make fixed investments all of the time in this country. But we're finding that many firms are making the investments, but because of this deluge of imports that come in, are unable to benefit from the scale economies that would make them cost competitive, as Honorable McPherson was saying, because of reasons not of their own doing. Because they can't control to what degree subsidized exports of agro-processed goods coming from parts of Europe, or even subsidized exports coming from other parts of Asia, and to what degree and on what terms those are accessed by wholesalers downstream in our country. And so in a sense, tariffs take into consideration that sales volumes, output, profit margins, capacity utilization, foregone investment, many elements which seen as a whole allow investigating teams to go to the commission, make their case, and the commission then makes its own assessment on a case-by-case basis, which ultimately leads to a recommendation. What are we doing on corruption? Indeed, I think this is linked to the technological issue. I've heard concerning reports since I joined in January about people even selling ITAC permits on the streets. And part of what we need to do as we shift away from significantly paper-based processes is to embed technological processes that will say, if I get a permit on the street in Pretoria, that permit will not be picked up on the SARS system, because this is a multi-agency enforcement framework that we have. We are indeed, of course, concerned that in some instances when cases are brought, before the respective law enforcement, investigative and prosecuting authorities, that some of those cases maybe don't, land up in the courts. And that's, something that we can never have any control over. And I think that is something quite difficult. The other question was, industrial firms, and I think Astral example, before I forget. Look, I don't think we have authority over what's happening at a municipal level or what's happening with regard to load shedding. If you read any of our reports, we recognize this, that firms are not only in distress due to imports, firms are also in distress due to all manner of other issues. But increasingly, that does not necessarily then say the imports aren't a contributing factor. And we have to deal with these issues. That's why in the first slide, we speak about this issue around the network industries, because we're not going to achieve all of these grand things we want on industrialization if we do not resolve what is happening at a network industry level in our real economy. There was the question then, of course, around from Honorable Munakedi on which specific master plans we are working on. Well, we are already doing this work in some of the master plans. If I can draw your attention, because we administer some of the automotive ones, we are an integral part of the automotive master plan. We are engaged in the textile master plan because we administer drawbacks and rebates there. And to the point that was being raised, we recognize, that when you set tariffs in place, even industrial firms, that increases their cost base. That's why we have rebates. That's why we have drawbacks that allow somebody to import something specifically if they want to export it. So it's not in this sense that we have a hard, dogmatic approach to trade policy. Our instruments, by their design, allow for us to make a pragmatic assessment and then act in a corresponding fashion. And I think, that is, if there's any message I'd like to take across, it's that one. I think, answer to some degree the illicit trade issue. We continue to work with SARS. We've got an interagency task team that works on these issues, and the police and the NPA. And of course, that is linked to our scheduled and unscheduled inspections. We would hope, of course, at some stage to have a much bigger presence in our ports of entry, especially if one thinks of what's happening at Tegwini. And so we have seen instances in the last while, of course, of containers bringing in secondhand clothing, containers bringing all manner of problematic things. These are the issues we need to deal with and continuously deal with. It's not something you fix, in any one year. And in so long as global supply chains continue to ease, we are going to be confronted by these challenges. We do see, of course, the challenges that some of these imports that are coming in illicit ways undermine our industrial policy interventions to support some of the labor-intensive sectors. So I make the example of textiles. intentionally. But we also are having a challenge now and having some debates and discussion with our colleagues in the respective agencies around, for instance, the landing of second-hand used vehicles for other countries, because we don't allow for commercial purposes, second-hand vehicles to come into our country as per our import and export control regulations. Honorable Thring asked a very important question on beneficiation. What is our policy view? Now, I do wish to say, I mean, we're not a policy entity. So what I'm going to say now must not be deemed as the policy view of ITAC, because I don't think ITAC can pronounce on a policy view outside of that emerging from the department. And I think the department is quite clear on this question of trying to, even in how it's organized itself, to try and achieve this objective of much greater value addition arising from our comparative advantage in minerals. And I think we've seen examples across the world, if you take Indonesia, for instance, where there's been a significant move in this direction in relation to, nickel and chrome exports in order to beneficiate in Indonesia. Similarly, too, for us, if one thinks about the debates on strategic minerals globally, the issue of lithium is an interesting one. New energy vehicles, the bulk of the cost is embedded in the battery. We also engage with the issue of battery storage. Zimbabwe next door is the 6th largest country with known reserves of lithium. And we have a significant history in South Africa of R&D and patents related to lithium battery research. It does create, certainly within SADC, and this is my view, as I said, because we're not a policymaking entity, but it does raise the prospect and the possibility of South Africa becoming not just a elementary processing hub, but really engaging in high value, high complexity research and development activity linked to future applications of some of these minerals, including platinum, including copper, including cobalt, and more importantly, I think in this case, including lithium as well. So I think that would be my response on that one. And indeed, I think the point you raised on domestic laws with regard to imports related to strategic sectors, I mentioned the point on second-hand vehicles, second-hand textiles, and so on, and how our enforcement activity is trying to deal with that. I think there was a question on which products on anti-dumping. Look, maybe let me make a general point here, because I do think there are detailed sense of what these products are. But at a high level, these are steel, agri-processing, tires in the last instance. Now we're dealing with one of the issues there. And of course, other building supplies related issues. And if one thinks about two related things, the one is the subsidy debate in the Eurozone. The second one is, of course, the implication of steel-based exports from China not being able to enter the US and the EU and many other places. And global steel overcapacity, driven, of course, by the Chinese as well. We anticipate that in the next while, we're likely to get a lot of applications as a result of the reopening of the Chinese economy and, of course, this overcapacity issue. And that's why we need to be extra vigilant to ensure that that doesn't displace all the jobs. We've seen, since the global financial crisis, if you take just the basic iron and steel subsector of manufacturing, they've lost more than half of the jobs they had. If you compare the last quarter of 2009 to the last quarter of last year, nearly or more than half of the jobs have been lost. And so we don't want to have a continuing situation like that. And so at some stage, there must be a holding role that allows the sector to breathe, and so that we can enable some advance in the sector as well. And I think that is the function of the master plans. And our role there is to make sure that our instruments play a complementary role. Let me maybe, Honorable Acting Chair, make a last point. And I think Nikki will deal with the issues around the WTO, bilateral questions, and to what degree we are engaged with our colleagues across the world who are working on these matters. I just want to speak on the ban, because I think Honorable Bergman is saying, well, the evidence is saying crimes have declined. Now, we issued an advisory note on our experience since November right through to the end of March on the 6-month export ban on scrap metal and copper and our own observations. And that has certainly been shared with the respective people in the executive. But our sense emerging from that is that the evidence is mixed. So if you check, for instance, the evidence coming from Eskom and Transnet and the South African Police Service, and it's unfortunate that some of the data at a municipal and even a telecoms level we're unable to access, and we hope that at some stage we'll be able to do so, is telling a very mixed picture. So if you check at Eskom, the picture is slightly different to what one might be seeing at Transnet. At Transnet, they are saying the incidences of theft and the length of the steel products stolen has declined. But the attribution is not necessarily to the ban. The attribution is to investment by their clients in greater private security alongside the train tracks. We are also hearing, for instance, from the police service that yes, there's been a marginal decline, but that marginal decline does not necessarily mean that the thefts have stopped. And so even the November regulations had said we need to ensure that sufficient progress is made. If not, there might be a basis for the extension. Now, you know, the honorable member suggests that the announcement of an extension has happened. I have a different understanding. My understanding is that the notice issued last week is saying that the minister takes a view that he might want to extend it. And so he has gone out to the public to ask for a consultative process, which is ongoing at the moment, which will then be followed by a firm announcement as to what happens. So we are not there yet. And I understand also we have about 7 days or so for the last set of regulations to expire as well. So I just wanted to maybe share that sense that I have, that certainly from the evidence we've seen, there's a mixed picture. But also there's a bigger question. I mean, it is 6 months, long enough a period to be able to assess the efficacy of a measure, by the way, which is aimed at trying to mitigate theft. And I think we must move away from the notion that this is a trade measure and yeah, now it's affecting our exports and so on. No, this is not a trade measure. This is a measure aimed at dealing with the theft of public infrastructure. And I think until such a stage where there's sufficient inroads in ensuring that this doesn't happen and that the market where these things are sold onto is effectively regulated in a proper manner, we might need measures of this kind. And of course, a big part of what we are doing, we're at the center, by the way, of working on building a digitized metal licensing regime that is able to digitize, you know, all the two-party transactions of scrap and copper that are happening, so that we can get a bigger sense and a dashboard of what exactly is happening in this market.
As the Chief Director, Trade Branch as well. While we waiting for Mr. Ayabonga Gawe, we can give to the department to respond on those questions. Over to you, Ms. Nikki Kruger.
Thank you very much, Honorable Acting Chair. Chair, I think the question, as the Chief Commissioner has indicated in terms of the WTO and what we are doing as government in the WTO is the one that was really directed at the department. As the honourable members know, South Africa is a member of the World Trade Organization, and there's a number of agreements, as the Chief Commissioner has also indicated, that sets out certain obligations for the department, for a country that is a member. And in terms of anti-dumping, that I think is what the specific question related to, the anti-dumping agreement in the WTO provides how countries can deal with instances where there is dumping that is taking place in their country that affects their industry. And of course, dumping is a company, is from a company level, not at a country level. So in the WTO, we as South Africa are very active participants. We do raise issues in terms of anti-dumping in the committee in the WTO that deals with trade remedies. So it deals with anti-dumping, countervailing and safeguard. So where there is a specific concern, we raise it there. There's discussions there in terms of how the instrument, the dumping or safeguard instrument, the subsidy, countervailing instrument that deals with subsidies, how that can be better used, how countries are using it. But it's not we don't in the WTO discuss how another country is dumping, for example, in South Africa. So you won't in the WTO raise a concern that, say, a company in the United States is dumping in South Africa. You use the instrument that was developed in the WTO to deal with that. Where we do raise concern is where we are the recipient of an investigation. So, for example, if China does an investigation on a product from South Africa, or the EU do an investigation on a product that comes from South Africa, we do raise where there is merit. We will raise a concern in terms of how those countries are, and the investigating authorities in those countries are doing the investigation, and whether they are meeting the requirements in the anti-dumping agreement. We have received the same sort of queries in terms of in the WTO, where South Africa is doing the investigation, and whether what ITAC is doing is meeting our obligations in terms, for example, the anti-dumping agreement, and we will deal with it there in the specific committee in the WTO. We have on some occasions been formally were the subject of a formal consultation process with other countries in terms of how we investigate, and those instances where there was formal consultations under the dispute settlement understanding has never moved further. We've reached an agreement there, and it never moved further to a formal dispute. So we actively participate. We raise concerns in terms of anti-dumping in the WTO, also with in our bilateral engagements with different countries. We will raise concerns in terms of either anti-dumping investigation that they are undertaking, but also where ITAC is busy with an anti-dumping investigation or a subsidy investigation. We will raise it bilaterally also when there's an opportunity with countries. Of course, in general, in the WTO, as I said, we're very active participants, and we in various instances with other departments, relevant departments, especially the Department of Agriculture, have raised trade concerns where there is either technical barriers to trade or where there's sanitary or phytosanitary measures that is being imposed by other countries that affect our exports. We do raise it there as trade concerns in the various committees. And as I'm sure the members, honourable members, are aware, we have also started a formal consultation process under the dispute settlement understanding in the WTO on the new measures from the European Union on citrus that will have a very costly effect on our exports of citrus. So maybe, Chair, let me stop there. We can also provide further information in writing if needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nikki Kruger. I think that will be suffice to say we can get the written response on the questions so that we are able to familiarize ourselves with whatever that we have raised around the anti-dumping and the manner in which the WTO are also working with our department. Currently, there are no other questions, and let me just thank to the team, DTIC, and also the team ITAC for the presentation. But I see there's a hand, Honorable Malemecha.
Thank you, Chair. I did not hear respond to the fewer questions that I posed in terms of the illicit trading. I did not, unless if I was not clear, then I can repeat. But if I was clear, I did not get the response on that.
Okay. No.
Chair?
Thank you much.
Chairperson, the commissioner
Yes.
was mid-answer when he was kicked out. So maybe you want to proceed with his response that he was busy with at the time, Chair.
Oh, okay. No, he's back now. Welcome back, Honorable Ayabo, the chief. Director, yes, or alluded to some questions, but I don't know whether we were able to get them. But there was also a proposal from the Chief Director from the DTIC that they will write the written response so that we get an understanding of all the questions. Over to you, if you can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Acting Chair, and my apologies there, colleagues. I just had to change my connection because, of load shedding. And it seems whoever was the system operator ran it a bit late this morning. So that's fine. The response I was busy with, I think, and I'd reached the tail end of it when I got cut off, was that there isn't a hard and fast announcement, certainly on the extension of the ban, and that we are at the moment in a process where interested parties have been called upon to make comments into a public comments process around the extension of the regulations that were issued in November 2022. And in those regulations, there was an assertion that where insufficient progress has been made in dealing with the issue of public infrastructure theft, because I think that that's the main objective here. This is not a trade measure to try and limit exports necessarily for beneficiation purposes or anything like that. But it's really trying to primarily deal with the public theft of infrastructure. The PPS, on the other hand, might be deemed a bit more of a measure aimed at trying to make sure that downstream mills have access to feedstock. That's another story altogether. But in this instance, this one is really about dealing with the public theft. And I think the point I was making, Honorable Acting Chair, is that the data is mixed. Certainly from the reports we've seen from Transnet, from the SAPs, from ESCOM, and of course, some of our own monitoring of the data that has come through. And so in a sense, I think what we would want is to allow the process. Let's hear comments from the industry and interested members of the public. And then thereafter, one would think that I guess the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Competition will make a view as to what the future of this particular regulation is. Maybe to the point that Honorable Malemacha was raising. I tried to respond to it, but maybe I didn't do a good job. So I'm not sure, Honorable Acting Chair, whether that one might also benefit from a written response. But let me say this, that we do in our inspection and enforcement work quite closely with our colleagues at the receiver of revenue in customs and the South African Police Service and even the prosecutorial authorities to try and ensure that we are all working in the same way to deal with illicit imports. So if you check, for instance, the retail, clothing, textile, footwear, and leather master plan, one of the key pillars and legs on which that master plan stands is a collaborative social effort to deal with illicit imports, because those take the sting out of any industrial policy measures that we might want. And as I said earlier, that work continues. The inspections scheduled and unscheduled continue. And we are indeed concerned, especially in the areas linked to our master plans in automotive and textiles, about this, rising issue of secondhand clothing imports that come in. And of course, there are parts of secondhand clothing that we make provision for. There are items where you might allow it if it's for cloths that are used in cleaning industrial equipment or whatever. So there are those limitations. And similarly for the import of secondhand used vehicles, there are, if it's for personal use, if it's an inheritance, if it's for a film, it's, for all of these things we allow it. But for commercial purposes, we don't. And so our task is really to make sure that we work in unison there, but also where technology is involved, that we make sure that that technology is mutually intelligible so that we are able to avert an instance where somebody gets a fake import permit and then that person uses that to be able to jippo the system. It should be that as soon as somebody gets a permit, that permit also triggers a similar entry in the systems of some of the other agencies that are responsible for enforcement as well. So I think that was the response, unless I might have missed the question and in response given quite a shoddy answer.
Thank you very much. I think we covered. Maybe in the process, Honorable Malemacha will benefit from the questions that will be responded through a writing response. Now we dealt with the issues here. Let's see if we, in terms of the agenda, Secretariat, where are we now? Let's thank the DTIC and also the ITAC team for the presentation, but we are definitely looking forward for the written response for members to get more clarity on their questions. Thank you very much once again. Apologies for the delay in terms of your connectivity and stuff, but thank you very much. We are back. Okay. Secretariat, let's check.
Chair,
yes.
That concludes the business of the day, Chair. Just to announce, tomorrow we're having a briefing, if I may, Chair, through you.
Yeah, in terms of the announcement, thank you.
Yeah, Chair, that we will get a briefing by the NCC on the fourth quarter financial and non-financial performance. And then we'll also receive a progress report from the NCC on the timeshare industry. Those are the two agenda items for tomorrow. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Just reminding members that as trade and industry, we belong to a cluster. Then the clusters are busy now at the mini plenaries. So I requested all of us, when we adjourn this meeting, we reconnect or joining the clusters that we need to attend to as a mini plenaries. The meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malimech.
Recording stopped.
Good, Chair.
Thank
Bye,
you,
colleagues.
Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.